So now it's time for a panel discussion. We're going to talk about biocarbon and the decarbonization of the Swedish industry 2.0 towards the SDGs. And I'm now going to hand over to a colleague here, another moderator. But first I'd like to introduce the speakers here in the panel, the participants. It's Klara Helstad, head at the Sustainability Industry Unit at the Swedish Energy Agency. Welcome, Klara. Please take a seat. Gustav Melin, CEO at Svebio. Please join us. Thank you. And also we have with us Lars-Gunnar Almryd, who is CEO of Envigas. Please join us here. And the moderator, of course, Rafael Guedez. You are a researcher at the Heat and Power Division at the Energy Department at KTH, and you're also a Naventus energy, renewable energy advisor. So I hand over to you, Rafael.
Thank you, Katarina, and thank you all for joining us today. So I hope we have a nice discussion, and I will clarify. We'll talk about biomass in general and how biomass can serve towards decarbonizing or meeting our Swedish targets, right? Being carbon neutral by 2045 or so forth. Some key notes there. I'm sorry that I have my phone here, my notes here. It's not that I'm waiting for a message. According to the IEA report recently published last year, roughly 60% of the energy consumption in Sweden comes from biomass. And that's a shocking message because usually we refer or think about renewables and think about electricity and that most of our electricity is hydro or nuclear, etc. But you know, energy is consumed in Sweden to a large extent in heat. And then when it comes to heat, if we put aside heat pumps or the electrification path, those that come from fuels or related, I mean for heat, almost 70% comes from biomass today. So that is our background. And then I want to discuss then, start talking about, well, with the experts here, like where are we today, why are we there, and how are we going to move into the future? What are the roles of biomass coming next? And the challenges, of course, and how we can, well, try to make the policy makers, decision makers, or investors try to make us reach there then, right? So I'll start with today, and I think when I say, you know, that biomass is, or bioenergy is widely used for heat in the industrial sector and district heating, and I'd like to hear maybe from Klara, since you're very familiar to the industrial sector, which are those sectors in the industry that today harvest biomass, and which ones you see coming up?
Well, of course, if we look at the situation today, the forest industry, the pulp and paper industry is a very large share of the, they use a lot of biomass, of course, as a part of their main products, of course, but then the final energy use within the industrial sector, well, half of it is used in the pulp and paper industry. So we have a strong history from the raw material, from the forest, of course, in Sweden. But what we see today is that other parts of the industry is more and more looking at the biomass as a way to reduce their emissions. So, for instance, I would like to mention the iron and steel industry, which have a large share of the fossil greenhouse gas emissions in Sweden. They're looking, for instance, as bio-oil. I would like, for instance, hybrid initiative. Perhaps you have heard very much about the hydrogen part of the hybrid initiative. But I also have a bio-oil pilot in Malmberget for the pelletization process. And actually that pilot has been very successful. So they are already implemented in the pelletization plant in Malmberget. That is only one example, but of course biochar or biocoal is necessary in the reduction process in the iron and steel. If you want to make steel, you need some kind of coal in the process, and that we could see the biomass as one step. And then we had the chemical industry and the refineries, for instance. You could look at the case of Perstorp, the chemical industry. And of course, they will use both renewables from and other fossil-free solutions. So it's a mixture if we look around among different industries in Sweden. Right. And things are going quite fast now.
That's for sure. Yeah, we see every day in the news how, you know, renewables everywhere, everything moving fast. So interesting. So pulp and paper, that we knew. So that's our
that's the base,
strength,
I would say.
in Sweden. But definitely good to hear from you, all the other sectors that are moving and that are also considering biomass already now and in the upcoming. And we will talk about future and hydrogen and so on in the next questions. But before that, I also wanted to hear from you, Gustav, maybe on what are the main challenges today? If we see this all these opportunities, right? And we're clear that already today, even 60% comes from biomass in terms of energy consumption. Is there a limit? Are there challenges? Are they political? What are the limits? What are the challenges technical to realize this?
Yeah, I could start to give some more light to the political background, or the background why 40% of the energy use is biomass in Sweden today. So it's the largest energy source, larger than hydro and nuclear together, even though it's mainly heat. But the reason why we have 40% is that we have no fossil domestic fuels. I would say we have a large forest, but we have no fossil domestic. We have no company representing the fossil sector, so to say. We have our conflict in Sweden with the nuclear. So it's nuclear or renewables. That's the conflict. But we have had no conflicts on the fossil side. So that's why we have developing the renewable side and biomass side over the years. And we had the carbon tax from 1991. So it's more than 30 years now that we have had a carbon tax. And it has been on a high level. So that's why we have found a lot of different good solutions without subsidies. But going back to your question then, what are the problems or the obstacles to reach for the future? And I'm a bit different than other people because I have, or I know I have this thesis that the biomass is not limiting for the development. Most of the people globally believes that there is lack of biomass. In my 35 years in this sector, it's only 1 year that we have problems to deliver wood chips, and it was in 2001. And the reason was that Stockholm was full of snow. It was this snow pilot or snow canoe from, some of you remember that. So it was 1 meter in 1 day, and it was a cold winter. So then we had problems. But otherwise, all other years, there is lack of demand for biomass or biomass volumes. So our main problem, it's not technical. There are technical issues. We need to do more research, of course. But our main problem is the narrative, the belief that there is not biomass enough. There is a food issue in the world. The NGOs that try to push this picture all the way that it would be better for nature if we don't touch the forest. We would have higher biodiversity if we don't touch this forest and so on. I think that's the main problem. And then that influences politicians to be negative to biomass development. I mean, we are not allowed to use energy crops more than 7% of the energy use in Europe because of the EU legislation. But everyone knows that there is no demand for more crop production in Europe. There is a lot of closing. We have been closing down arable lands since the 80s in Europe. And actually, the last 60 years, the food production per hectare is higher than the population growth on the whole globe. So it's almost 2% increase in production per hectare, but the growth of the population is 1.62% for the last 60 years. But we don't believe the data. We have a narrative that we believe in, which is mainly running the policy. So I think that's the main problem.
The main roadblock, according to you. And anything to comment here, Klara, Lars-Gunnar?
Well, I would say that the policy and regulations issues are really important. And right now, in the European Union, there are different directives under revision, and it's important to engage in those revisions and be careful and see all details, because of course we have a different situation compared to some other countries in the European Union. They have had large deforestation earlier in their history and have a completely different type of landscape than we have in the Nordic countries, I would say. So we have to be careful and look at the revisions, I would say, of the RED directive, for instance, and other directives, because it affects both bioenergy, but also when we talk about electrification, it's also what is fossil-free electricity or renewable. It's important each of these words could affect.
Definitely, or what is sustainable to come.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
And I agree, usually, I mean, as a researcher, the issue with biomass that comes to mind when developing new technologies or let's say expanding biomass, it always comes to feedstock or prioritizing, is it food or is it the energy or so on, right? So it's interesting to hear from you, your perspective for so many years in the industry, saying that there is not such a thing, or critical at least, in terms to believe that there is a shortcoming of feedstock and that we could further exploit that. That's what I'm getting. Yeah. Right? Anything to add there, Lars-Gunnar?
No, but I agree to Gustav when it comes to the historical facts, but I think we have to be a bit humble looking forward, because we don't know what will happen as an effect of the climate change effects. On one side, the trees will grow faster, which will make more biomass, but on the other side, it creates also worms and diseases and fires and so on. But there is also a huge transformation going on in the industry, and the use of biomass, as we will discuss, which will create new users. So I think we have to be a bit humble when looking forward, and at least take into account that we need to use and utilize the raw material in the best and most clever way.
Yeah.
Efficient processes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we have a lot of potential still in the Swedish industry, and of course in other countries as well. We have still too much, we could be much more efficient in many different processes. And also, of course, more circular solutions. We could use our raw material much more than we do today. So
I'm hearing, a lot of like, we could do. So let us move into what are we, we talk about where we are, the industries that are doing it, obstacles perhaps. So, and Lars-Gunnar mentioned, what comes next. And to me, when I do a small research, I think, well, not to me, but anyone that goes into a small research of what's happening with biomass besides the established, heating part on pulp and industry and so on, I think three things come to mind in looking into the Swedish sector. One, it's the integration of carbon capture in the combined heat and power plants that are run by biomass. That's one thing. The other, it's on biocarbon, like you mentioned, and its potential role in the decarbonizing fully the steel industry. And the other, it's on, and it's also of my own curiosity, like, don't we see also an opportunity for biomass in the hydrogen industry in general? I mean, you can still produce hydrogen from biomass gasification, for instance, or other processes. So I'd like to address these 3 points. It's challenging in time, but let's start with one of them. So let's start with the carbon capture part and combined heat and power plants. So combined heat and power plants today still serve an important purpose in Sweden. I mean, they are 8% of the electricity, roughly, and provide a big part of the district heating, heat, right? So what about, can Gustav, Klara, or any of you tell us about what is this technology and how will that enable us to be at the forefront of this, by Stockholm Exergi being one of the front leaders now implementing it, and what does it mean to us? Well,
actually that is of course an area where the policy issues are very important, because bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, we want to reach negative emissions in the future. And then we are looking both on the heat and power plants, of course, and also the forest industry, which have a very large share of the biogenic emissions. But today, of course, you need a market to have a kind of a pull in this pull in the system, and that is one thing where the Swedish Energy Agency has. We have done a lot of work the recent years and sent a report to the government and suggest a system for how we could have this market pull from a policy perspective. And of course, then there are some of our neighboring countries which have a tradition from the oil and gas industry. And so we are looking at the bilateral possibilities to, in the future, find logistical solutions to export.
Okay, so you see it as the roadblock comes more from, okay, we have a technology that is being demonstrated, right?
Yeah.
But then we have a roadblock, which is what do we do with that, right? We need to develop the market for CO2.
Well, of course, you need a price because it costs something to install the equipment at the heat and power plants, and of course, you need a market, and that is what the political part of the work. You need something. You need a price to.
So that you can recover that investment. Anything to add here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the first thing you think is to try to put it into the emission trading scheme. I mean, the price now this week was 78 euros per carbon dioxide ton. So then there is also a proposal in the EU Fit for 55 now to increase the annual decrease of the curve from 2.2% per annum to 4.2%. So rather big increase on a high price already. So if they do that, I think it could be a good timing to include bio-CCS in the EU ETS system. So a part of that 4.2% would be bio-CCS and then priced, so that you could get today then 78 euros. And I think that's a level that can work for some of the companies, and some of the companies would still need some support, subsidies to develop technology. But we should have Fabian Levin today in this panel, but he got COVID, and we were there visiting his plant in December, and he told us that they use the same technology that they cleaned the gas, the city gas with 20 years ago. So it's known technology. He has taken different kind of equipment from the shelf and put that together, and it works quite well.
Okay, so then come to the same point, like, so it's not, the obstacle is not technology, but again, then policy.
It's the market.
It's the market that
like for
policy.
biomass as a whole, it's more the market issues.
Good. And let us move to the other point then that is also happening in Sweden, and Sweden is going to be at the forefront. 2030 we will be delivering carbon neutral or fossil-free steel, right? So what is such a thing as fossil-free steel, and how that biomass plays a role in that picture? Is it needed? Lars-Gunnar, we start.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, whatever process you will use going forward, it's a big transformation going on in the steel industry, but whatever process you will use, you will need carbon atoms in this process, mostly for process reasons actually, but also for quality reasons of the final product. So carbon is needed, and if carbon is needed and you don't want to use fossil coal, then biomass is the solution as we know it now. So that means that biomass will play a role in this if we really want to make fossil-free steel. If we want to make almost fossil-free steel, then we can live without it.
But our goal should be 100%.
Yes,
so
sure.
Then we should have biocoal. Anything to add, Klara?
Well, no, yeah, I share the same view actually. So we could see a couple of examples, and of course it's easy to perhaps only focus on or only see one example maybe, but we could see many different processes in the iron and steel industry that actually you have a little bit different technologies, but still you need the biomass or biochar in some parts of the processes.
Good. So then we come to maybe, like I said, my own curiosity. And how do you see biomass and its role in the hydrogen ecosystem, right, or the hydrogen energy ecosystem? So right now we just hear about how everything new hydrogen strategy, hydrogen regulation at EU level, hydrogen everywhere, all driven by electrolysis. But we have technologies existing, not to be demonstrated or proven so much, that from biomass that allows us to have hydrogen as well. I'm a believer that we cannot just all shift to electrification everything, and that biomass will play a role there even as well. What did you think there?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why people are so happy with electrification is to get rid of combustion. and emissions and so on. But I think there is we shouldn't be so scared of combustion. It's very natural. I mean, there is no living cell on this planet without respiration, or which is the same process as combustion in a engine or a boiler. So it's very natural. You eat biomass and you work with your hands and so on. It's combustion in your cells. You in Swedish you say that when you're out running, you go for förbränning, or you could say that when you should burn some carbs. That's what you do when you run. So I mean, that's what we do. So it's not more strange. It's the only issue is to get rid of the bad emissions, and we can do that with modern technology. It's not difficult. But of course, since you believe that it's always carbon emissions when you use combustion, or if you believe that it's, I mean, all of us are experienced with bad emissions. So we need to get away from that, but we shouldn't mix up that with modern combustion. And then there is a great potential for a lot of different solutions. And I think that those companies that are in this sector is very interesting, and I believe that most of the combined heat and power plants will start to do either bio-CCS or some kind of pyrolysis carbon production investment. Because what they can do, today the combined heat and power plants, they go for 4,000 hours a year, and if they would invest in this sector, they could start to use their plants 8,000 hours a year. So, and then they should produce, in my view, like they do in Gävle now, in Setra, they produce pyrolysis oil to deliver to Preem, to produce biofuels. And they do that from sawdust 24/7, all year round. And most of the combined heat and power plants could do that. And then, so you get 40% roughly out of the energy in the wood chips, in the pyrolysis oil, that you could go for the biorefinery or use as peak load heating bio oil. And then you get you can get the coal, either put it into the combined heat and power plant and produce electricity and heat. You do that all the winter time, but in summertime you can produce coal like Envigas and sell that to the industry. And you can go in and produce electricity if needed during summertime. So there's a perfect match here between
Everything there.
more hours, you can produce oil, biofuels, charcoal, and electricity. So you you solve all the issues in the electricity system.
So we can tell you represent Svebio, and you very well sell biomass as a whole, and
So
you see biomass in all the sectors.
I believe more in that development than in the electrification development, because it's cheaper.
Okay. Anything to add? And just
Lower
wrap
cost.
up?
I think it's extremely interesting to see if you could produce or you can produce hydrogen from biomass, but there is some technical steps before you have it commercialized. But there is, of course, an opportunity also, for instance, for the local grid. If you add a fuel cell onto that, and you could have your own electricity production and so. So I think in this combined, transformed system, it's a very good opportunity of also potentially producing very cost-efficient hydrogen compared to the existing solutions.
I agree.
Potentially.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's all potential. And before giving the word to you, Klara, I'll say, I also think biomass, I mean, one of the challenges the hydrogen energy ecosystem have for industry is hydrogen storage. And the use of biomass as a fuel can be actually a way to store hydrogen from one production facility to where it's used, for instance. But Klara, anything to add as a last comment on this topic?
I just think that sometimes in the debate or in media, perhaps you are focusing only on one or two technologies, but of course there are many solutions that actually is needed. And you have to have both a short-term perspective on these matters, but also a very long-term perspective. So maybe some of the solutions are possible to implement in 2045 or even after that, but we need to do things now, but we also at the same time have to focus on the future far ahead. So I would say that if we look at an industrial plant already today, I would say that most of the cases they use already today a mix of different solutions. And it's just that perhaps it will be a different mix in the future, and you have to see that the whole system somehow is changing now, and we will get new connections between different parts of the industry. Maybe new circular solutions are developing, which you can't really, well, you can't stop the things.
Can't know for sure now.
No.
Well, I think our time is up, but it was a pleasure to moderate this session. And if I'm to summarize, I mean, we are firm believers that biomass has a role to play. Biomass, one key message people should know is biomass does play a role today that is very important because it's more than half of the energy final consumption. And we believe it will still be there in the existing sectors and possibly even more. And they're talking about the role of biocarbon in steel, in the hydrogen industry, and potentially as in the CHP plants of the future to provide even other services. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much.